Hello and a very warm welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some refreshments and are ready for our next session, Pride of Place, Restoring the Community. Investing in infrastructure for levelling up to mean something to people in their daily lives, we need to reach into every community in the country, from city centres to rural areas, to start to rebuild social capital and self-reliance in our most abandoned neighbourhoods. This needs to flow through central and local government, through MPs and their local offices, philanthropists, volunteers, schools, GPs, and other community leaders. Focusing on capital investment in local infrastructure is one way, and this panel is exploring investment building on the first round of the Levelling Up Fund that has supported £1.7 billion worth of projects in over 100 local areas across all corners of the UK. The three main categories cover investing in infrastructure, and they are transport investments, regeneration and town centre investments, cultural investments. Our next panel will examine current and future investments into communities to bring pride of place and look at how communities can flourish by bringing deprived and forgotten places back to life. To explore this topic, we're joined now by some great panellists. Richard Rowe, Corporate Director of Place, Trafford Metropolitan Borough Council. Richard is a dynamic member of the corporate leadership team within Trafford Council with strategic lead responsibility for inclusive economic growth, development, housing, homelessness, planning, building control, highways, transport, regulatory services, community safety, leisure provision, and the One Trafford Partnership. For you, that is quite a list. You're one busy person. He works towards the delivery sustainable economic and housing growth, vibrant town centres and accessible green spaces, leads on the council's investment and development portfolio, and is a non-executive director of Greater Sport and Trafford and Leisure CIC. Councillor Philip White, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Economy and Skills at Staffordshire County Council. Richard Wearmouth is Deputy Leader of Northumberland County Council and sits on the North of Tyne Combined Authority Cabinet. Richard has worked extensively with levelling up programmes in Northumberland and the North East, including the Borderlands Growth Deal, Town Deals, Leader Programme, Future High Street Projects, Reverse Beaching, Heritage Action Zones, and working to bring about an expanded North East devolution deal. Also joined today by Malcolm Harbour, CBE, Associate Director of Connected Places Catapult. Malcolm is a former MEP and Chairman of the Parliament's Internal Market Committee. He has a detailed knowledge of UK and EU procurement legislation. He recently retired after 8 years on the Governing Council of the University of Birmingham and has a special interest in the role of universities in the Levelling Up agenda. He led an LGA task force on innovation procurement, which produced a widely read report in 2017. Don't forget, we really want to involve you guys in the session, so please join in the conversation. Use the Q&A button. You can share your thoughts on LinkedIn as well with our hashtag PSE365. Richard Rowe, let's kick off with you. Let's talk first of all about what role culture can play in delivering regeneration. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Samantha. I think for us, we think culture can play a really important role in building social infrastructure and social capital. It's quite easy for us to think about major infrastructure capital spend, but actually culture is what connects communities. And if we're going to level up and build places, then we think culture's really central to that. Where in the borough, we're doing some work now on developing a new culture strategy. One of our levelling up bids that we submitted was based on the culture theme, to tell the story of place and build a sense of place, and ensuring that we're thinking about community well-being, health and well-being, alongside the other economic activity and economic investment that we're doing.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Malcolm, to you, how can community-centred innovation be encouraged in your view?
Well, I mean, I think the key to it is to find better ways of engaging the community in the sort of projects that they want to see, and that's why I'm interested from the procurement perspective, because I mean, any sort of capital projects, there's going to be some sort of procurement involved in that. And I note a number of cities, some European cities, are much more active in engaging communities in the development process. But I think some of my colleagues are doing a lot of work. I mean, I was in Newcastle recently, and I know I saw some really interesting community engagement projects there. And I think the second thing linked to this is we have to link investment in capital provision with investment in service delivery as well. I mean, I think part of the problem we have at the moment is that that not enough citizens are getting the benefits to which they're entitled, and actually delivery of services, in which are quite big investments, and streamlining that as well is all part. Making an efficient city is part of actually having a culture in which citizens really feel comfortable living and feel that they can have access, and so their views are heard by the people running the city, which means much more decentralization as well. And that's really the sort of third thing I would add. The government has got to get serious about devolving responsibilities, and levelling up is not going to be run out of Whitehall. It has to be run by the communities in which it's going to benefit.
Yeah, and so Richard Wearmouth, to you next, and your experiences there in Northumberland. What have been the challenges in keeping pace on levelling up projects there? Apologies, we can't hear you. I think we've got you now.
Am I there? Can you hear me now?
Got you.
There we go. So, apologies. So I think one of them Malcolm's kind of touched on there, which is that we sometimes need to let the government get out, or have the government get out the way, and push powers a bit further down. We still have situations in some of our programs where things go back into DULUP for sign-off, for checks and double checks and triple checks at multiple stages of projects. That's really frustrating. It's taken us a bit of time to build capacity in our county council and in our mayoral combined authority, but that's where the best work can be done, and in this sense, and where we can really get motoring, given the autonomy to do so.
Yeah.
Okay, and Philip, what about there in Staffordshire? What are the key levelling up challenges there?
Well, Staffordshire Staffordshire is a mixed bag, really, as a place, because we're quite a prosperous county in some respects. So we went through the reform process of sort of post-industrial change about 20 years ago, moving away from mining and other heavy industries. And so we've got great pockets of prosperity. We have very low unemployment, much lower than the West Midlands and national averages. But we've got pockets of entrenched deprivation that have been quite hard to shift. And I think one of the things that's been interesting watching the slight sharpening of focus on levelling up is moving away from a broad brush approach that we maybe saw at the start, defining entire areas as being in need of levelling up or not, to something that's a little bit more targeted. And that certainly suits a place like Staffordshire a lot better. And I think linking to one or two of the comments that have made by others, hopefully an increasing recognition that local leaders have got that detail on their areas about where that effort needs to be deployed and exactly what that effort needs to look like. And I think that's one of the things that we're really keen to see develop, perhaps as the money tightens, that could be replaced in terms of priorities by an increasing focus on real devolution, which isn't somebody in Westminster deciding what sort of devolution you want. It's asking local leaders what they need and then allowing them to get on with it.
Right, okay. Richard Rowe, let's talk about investment in infrastructure. Is it a priority for local authorities? Is infrastructure investment really necessary to delivering investment and regeneration in all areas?
Yeah, it's often critical. A lot depends on the nature of the regeneration, but thinking about physical infrastructure, green infrastructure, community infrastructure, that is the underpinning, the bedding of regeneration. If we want places to be accessible, if we want to develop inclusive growth, we need to think about transport infrastructure, how we invest in public transport and in active travel opportunities. We need to think about the public sector requirements, so education, schools, community spaces, health spaces. Certainly where we are in Trafford, a lot of the challenge that we have for our regeneration and our development schemes is actually not about the scheme themselves. It's about the wider implications of that access to health and education, in particular, absolutely critical issues. And so I'm thinking about that. It's hard to find the money. We are in very challenging economic climates. We know the pressure on public sector budgets. We're all waiting to see the outcome, I think, from the Chancellor's statement today, what that means for investment into public sectors, into public services more broadly. But I think we all recognise that investment into infrastructure, investment into regeneration is going to be really important to deliver the economic growth that we need, and to see what comes from levelling up and levelling up bids and what the future of levelling up is. We've got 3 bids sat there with DLUC. They've been sat there for a while. We're very keen to get on. We're ready to get on with those, with community support for those. We're just waiting for the government to let us know.
Okay, well, a question here from Gary Palmer, who's asked, do the panelists have examples of powers they would like to see devolved from central government to enable levelling up, particularly with regards to infrastructure improvement? Who'd like to answer that? Any of you have examples?
Yeah, I think for me, Samantha, I think it just, one of those things is about just the devolution of funding to in order to do this. And there are different devo packages all over the country, some more advanced than others. But in the Northeast, we really, in our part of the Northeast at least, don't have that transport devolution that we would like to see yet. It may come forward soon. We'll see what is said in the coming weeks. But stuff like that, and again, just the ability to move at pace is severely restricted when you've got to get stuff signed off in Westminster and Whitehall.
Yeah, I think can I come in on that? I mean, Rich is absolutely right. I think the whole problem with the approach is, that as he says, the devolution powers are so fragmented across the country. I know that the metropolitan mayors have been working very closely together across all parties to try and get the government to move on this. And we're not going to have a really powerful levelling up agenda unless Michael Gove gets to grips with this. And the other thing which, and I'd be interested to know what my colleagues think about it, because I have regular complaints about this, is the fact that at the moment government is insisting on having smaller scale projects with relatively tight timescales. And, that is not a strategic approach to levelling up. And if you want better solutions and more innovative solutions and develop new ways of doing things, you can't do that with a truncated timetable. And for example, I'll be interested to get my colleagues' views on this, but it seems to me that the annual budgeting process, which absorbs huge amounts of resources of councils, is actually inhibiting the real levelling up activity on the ground. And we do much better to have at least a 2-year budgeting process and more devolution if we're really going to make spending effective.
So I'll jump in next if I can, and I wholeheartedly support that. The biggest thing that central government could do for local government would be long-term financial settlements. The shadow boxing that we have to do in each of our MTFSs, our medium-term financial strategies, which run over 5 years, but are always making assumptions about what government might do, takes up enormous amounts of resources, and it makes it difficult to do that long-term planning. And I think in terms of areas specifically that devolving funding would be really useful, top of my list would be transport and skills.
Yeah.
I think they're the 2 most obvious ones. In our area, just bringing it home to Staffordshire again, one of our other challenges, which perhaps mirrors those pockets of deprivation, is that we've got pockets of lower skilled workers who are in employment, but their jobs won't necessarily be there in 10, 15, 20 years' time. And the local skills improvement plans are another example of this sort of effort, a one-size-fits-all strategy. We know what we need locally, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops to try and tell somebody how to spend the money that they could simply give you to spend in an efficient way. So I think transport and skills, directly answering the question, they're the first 2 that I...
Yeah.
And have any of you got any experience of lobbying government for this, for the devolution of more powers?
Absolutely. Can I just chime in on that last bit with Phil, which is as well, it's, we get these very nice capital projects that are delivered at pace or intended to be delivered at pace for the government's wider program, but there's no revenue often that comes with them. It inhibits your ability to do things.
Exactly.
And that would be really, really helpful, would be that longer term settlement around some, around county council budgets, around combined authority and mayoral budgets. It would make such a difference. And just to chime in again as well, to agree with Phil on the skills bit, which is absolutely critical, but loosening the grip of the Department for Education on some of their funding can be somewhat challenging. And that's, again, speaks to the sort of a little bit of the siloed mentality that you find in any entity, but particularly in Westminster, in terms of breaking this down. That would be really key.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I agree completely about skills. And in the West Midlands, I know Andy Street is having a big battle over this at the moment. I mean, we were slightly dismayed during the Conservative conference when the then minister, I'm not sure if she's still there, indicated that she wasn't very much in favour of devolved mayors and therefore reluctant to devolve skills. I mean, we have to have this as part of the overall, not just the levelling up agenda, but we also need skills, new skills, to deliver all the zero carbon improvements that we're going to be required to move forward on. I mean, upgrading of housing, which I'm sure all my three colleagues have got major tasks ahead of them in doing that, means the development of a whole set of new skills. And actually, I think we have a real opportunity in those skills to integrate them much more into neighbourhood activities as well. I know some cities like Bristol, I think, are already experimenting with social enterprises in local communities to build and to help regenerate and improve housing.
So let's just pick up on that.
All these things have to work together, and the point is the government seems to think in terms, as my colleague said, of capital, but actually it's not all about. You have to have a wholly integrated program of capital investment, skills development, and to improve the procurement process as well.
So let's talk about getting local people involved. How do we engage citizens in generating and implementing new ideas? And Richard Rowe, to you on that one.
I think you need to start from square one, don't you? I think it's about talking to communities and citizens about what they want, their feelings of place, their aspirations of place. We're doing some work now in Stretford Town Centre, which is one of our regeneration priorities, where we have received government funding through Future High Street Fund. But we're also doing some work now around the community investment district, thinking about the bid model, which is well established, but is there something similar we can do from the community side, using some funding that's come through to the community sector for Power for Change? We're really starting to think about different ways about how we engage and support the community to get involved in not just the starting point of the regeneration, the physical regeneration, but then what happens when that's done? What happens when the cranes have gone away and the physical development has taken place? How do you ensure that places remain valid, viable, supporting existing communities? How do we get communities thinking about the management of community space and open space? And that's a big push for us over the next few years.
Anyone else like to come in on that?
Yeah, I feel after you.
Yeah, I think I was ever so slightly quicker, wasn't I? I mean, I think one thing that shouldn't be overlooked is that good old-fashioned representative democracy that we have, and it comes back to that point about local decision making versus national decision making. I think your elected representatives are that interface between what what government should be doing for you and what local people want. And if that works effectively, you should have a pretty good idea about what's important to people in your area. The question then of how you do those things is down to a lot of local engagement and finding the people who are willing to pick up the baton on that. We live in a society that relies on those good people who want to step forwards. and engage, whether that's consultations or getting their hands dirty with something a little bit more. But your local representatives should have that. They should have that grip on what it is that their local communities want and need, and how you balance those two things, because want and need aren't always necessarily directly connected, are they?
Yeah, I would entirely agree. And one thing, when I sort of first came into office way back now in 2017, there was really sort of one thing I wanted to get going with all of elected representatives, regardless of party or no party, was to start those discussions. We set up, in Northumberland's a bit unique. We've got lots of little towns, market towns, forgotten towns, mining towns, coastal towns. And we set up a conversation with those elected representatives, as Phil's sort of pointing to, in each case, started the process of what actually gets said in your communities. But then after that, ran roadshows, and we really wanted to get out and meet the public. And places like Blythe, in Blythe Valley, famous of the last election, was when we ran those roadshows, we set up in the middle of the market square, which was pretty dead in terms of the number of vacancies in the surrounding buildings, and just said, "Come along, tell us what you want." Put a load of display boards up. We had 2,000 people through in the space of a day, in a community of 30-odd thousand people, to tell us exactly what they thought. And their ideas were roughly in step with our own, and they've helped us to refine that process. And we've made sure, as we've gone right the way through the programme with Future High Street and through the town deal, that we've kept those going, and we've kept engaged with people to make sure that they're on the same path as us, and that's kept us current, and it's been very, very productive.
We started off, I mentioned in the introduction about investing in infrastructure so that levelling up means something to everybody in their daily lives, to start to rebuild social capital. I'm interested in sort of all of your experiences in that and how you continue to build on that. If you'd like to go first.
Can I just add a point which sort of partly links together, about the importance of this process of consulting communities at the moment, when in Connected Places, we've been doing a lot of work about changing travel patterns in cities post-COVID, where far more people are now having some sort of high working life, working from home more, and commuting in some cases. The commuting patterns are changing. I think that's already evident in places where Tuesdays to Thursdays are much busier than Monday and Friday now. But it also means that people are actually spending more time in their local communities. They're working from home, mainly different sort of facilities, and different sorts of infrastructures, and so there are opportunity for, I think, from this to be able to regenerate more communities that have felt neglected and where investment has come out and retail offers have declined over the last few years.
Who else wanted to come in on that?
I think it's really important that when we're looking at investment in infrastructure and we're looking at regeneration, that we do remember why we're doing it and the purpose of it, and that is about building and supporting communities and local communities. There was, we were talking before about the evolution around employment and skills. That's absolutely critical. There's no point just doing the big investment without doing things that bring in jobs and employment if you're not also doing the work around local employment and skills and ensuring that people locally are able to access those jobs and the opportunities that are created. Otherwise, you just end up importing ineffectively workforce who are commuting from elsewhere. You don't get the benefit, you get the downsides of community traffic and everything that comes from that. So I think it's when we're thinking about what we're investing in, let's think about what we're trying to achieve at the end and what we want the place to look like, what we want the community well-being to look like, and what we want that local community to ensure that we're working with them to access the jobs that they need. Higher education, absolutely critical, and further education, absolutely critical as part of that infrastructure that we develop.
And just a last thought, I think what a lot of people also want to know is how will levelling up benefit the climate? Everybody wants to know what's the benefits now, and zero carbon emissions. Philip, perhaps if you can tell us how levelling up there is helping tackle climate change.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those journeys that we're on, isn't it? And it's one of those points where that question about where central government and local government meet is really important. And I'll give the example in Staffordshire of our Hydrogen Technologies Valley, something that we share with Derbyshire, which you might have had in mind when you asked me to speak. So we're lucky in that in our part of the world we've got some of the world's leading manufacturers doing things with hydrogen. So we've got Rolls-Royce making aero engines, Alstom making hydrogen trains, Toyota making hydrogen cars, and JCB making hydrogen plant and machinery all along the A50, which links the M1 and the M6. And it's a coincidence that all of that and that they've all got a shared interest in products that are very similar but non-competing, that collectively would contribute massively to decarbonising. There's some big investment that government could make along that corridor to help turbocharge those businesses who are getting on with it already. And I think that's one of the things that you can sometimes miss in these discussions. People in communities and businesses and indeed local government are all getting on with it. The question is where government does dip in to help. And there, what we'd like is some transport improvements, as you might expect, some investment in skills, because we need to train the engineers to work in all these businesses. But crucially, it's where does the hydrogen grid roll out first, which is definitely in the realm of big government. It's not something that local government can do. And there's a very, very good study by Midlands Connect and Midlands Engine into this, and an ask of government for some fairly significant funding. And that's the sort of thing where government should be coming in and intervening and doing something locally. We'll get on with the rest between communities, businesses and local government. Fingers crossed they're all listening.
Yeah, let's hope so. Well, thank you very much for being here and for your time and for listening. Really interesting to hear your thoughts and hopes for the future as well. Thank you to both Richards, Malcolm and Philip. Thank you. Okay, well, do stay with us. Next up, we have our next segment. I'm delighted to introduce Greta Starks, a partner at Ryder Levitt Bucknell, who has a pre-recorded speech for us. Thank you.
Hello, especially to those of you I haven't met in the session so far today. I'm Greta Starks and I'm a project manager, which never feels like the most exciting discipline to confess to, but hopefully I can make up for that by telling you about my role at RLB. As Head of Place and Communities, I get to support clients like you in the important work you're doing. And I'm also really fortunate to look after teams working from our Manchester, Liverpool and Belfast offices. So that means I get an excuse to spend lots of time in those very different but equally fascinating cities, delivering projects in neighbourhoods across the North and Northern Ireland with my team, but also my colleagues at RLB, so from commercial management to building surveying, health and safety to sustainability. One of the interesting things about speaking at an event like this is that it's in your diary for a long time. So you have lots of time in the run-up to think about what you're going to say. And I have to say, I can't remember a time when the circumstances in the lead-up have led to me rethinking what might be helpful more often. There are plenty of words and phrases that have been used to describe what has taken place in the time since the white paper was released at the start of the year. And I can't repeat the vast majority because we're before the watershed. When we reached the point at the saga, as we'll call it, of the last few months, where it became clear that today was likely to be Autumn Statement Day, it felt really appropriate to be spending time with you all, learning from the fantastic panellists that Public Sector Executive have gathered for us to hear from. After such turbulent times, hopefully the Autumn Statement will feel like a signal of a return to a slightly less bizarre environment. However, given the context within which that comparison's made, the challenges, or crises, to stick with the term that's now widely being used to identify many of them, from the cost of living to climate, are many, urgent, and arguably deepening daily. After the long wait for the white paper, when it was released, it included statements that in theory felt reflective of what many feel is needed to address those deep-rooted and embedded challenges. For example, and I'm going to quote, "System change is not about a string of shiny but ultimately short-lived new policy initiatives. It's about root and branch reform." Now this and other similar rhetoric seems to be positioning the paper as delivering long-term cross-party commitment, addressing inequality, having a strategic response that's going to outlive governments and providing a much-needed stability, enabling the kinds of delivery that many of you have been calling for, that brings stability through highs and lows that will inevitably come. However, one of the many critiques at the time was that Levelling Up was simply repackaging existing ideas in shiny new terminology, with a paper that lacked the teeth to deliver substance. And sadly, I imagine many of us will feel that what we've seen over the last few months is evidence that was too accurate. So what can we do? What must we do if we're going to continue moving forward? While only time's going to show how the political landscape will settle, we know many of you are having to draw on your experience of delivering through challenging times, thinking about how to shape plans for the upcoming years. We are acutely aware that the places we help create can be central to how equal, resilient and sustainable places will be. And we get to see firsthand how our clients find ways to continue to deliver for their communities. While stability and access to funding are critical and political uncertainty creates huge challenges, we wanted to share today some examples of how public sector organisations we work with, like you, are finding ways to bring momentum and progress to these difficult times. We're seeing many of you creating the long-term plans that will enable you to move quickly and effectively when opportunities do re-emerge. Clients are asking us to help them to explore ways that similar communities have responded to the same challenges that they're experiencing, helping them to develop their briefs and thinking about how they can create a really robust, prioritised pipeline with oven-ready projects. Many of our clients have also demonstrated some really innovative ways to make the best use of the estate that they do have. They're asking us to support them to ensure that they've got a great baseline of data on all of their assets. And that's informing decision making, making sure they've got the foundation for successful delivery. Estate optimisation, maximising benefits with rationalisation and reuse, is also a pathway that we're seeing clients using to unlock much needed projects in these challenging times. So Heather, when I think back to when I started my career and how we talked about sustainability, things have definitely moved on from an occasional conversation on some projects. We are now seeing clients who've got a vision, who are putting that into a strategy, who are thinking about what that means. But should we be doing more?
To be honest, definitely yes. It's been an absolutely fantastic change that we've seen, just even during my career and even over the last 18 months, switching towards sustainability being integrated in each and every project, whereas before it just wasn't like that. However, the problem is at the moment we've got a lot of strategies, we've got a lot of goals. What we don't necessarily have is the path to get there, and that's not just within public sector, that's within private sector as well. So the key thing at the moment to do is to understand what your route there is, instead of just saying we're going to be net zero. That's a really ambitious goal. And we know there's so much that we've got to do in order to get there. But sometimes the scale of the problem can feel too big to address all at once. So my recommendation to any of my clients is always to say, understand your baseline first. You can't go towards net zero without understanding where you are currently. And the biggest thing that we can do there is understand what data we've got and actively work towards making that data more robust, and also being able to report on it. So integrating that into project processes is a really key way to try and address that transition towards sustainability and becoming more green.
So another change that we can see come in and that we're starting to think about is a move from a situation where we occasionally talked about reuse and retrofit, perhaps it was a heritage building, something of a lot of value, we'd be talking about it. So actually I'm hoping by the time we finish our careers a scenario where that is the default, where we are reusing our assets unless there's a really good reason not to. What do we need to be doing to start preparing for that? How can we get ready for that kind of different type of model of delivery?
It's a really key thing for the industry at the moment. I think traditionally we've all been set up to do new buildings. That's been the exciting thing, to create something brand new. But actually, if we look forward to 2050, the vast majority of our built environment is already built, and what we need to start focusing on is improving it as much as possible, particularly in an environment where we are at the moment, where the energy market is so volatile and everybody's under increasing pressures, cost of living, alongside those energy price uplifts. We need to make sure that those buildings are performing as best as we possibly can. And part of the business case for that is looking at embodied carbon, which is a relatively new thing for our industry. You know, that's never been sat there along the traditional drivers of time, cost and quality. We're now starting to look at carbon as well. We've seen some really exciting developments in the industry, whether that is through just people starting to monitor it more, but also through additional forms of regulation. So there's proposals at the moment for Part Z, looking at embodied carbon, integrating that into building regulation. And that is a really welcome change. So we can start to have that way of properly measuring it and making sure that it's comparable and good data as well. So looking at your embodied carbon actually really helps the business case for retaining that asset, because you've already theoretically spent that carbon. That carbon is completed, it's done. Let's try and retain it instead of adding more to it. So refurbishing, retrofitting and improving the actual environment, that's definitely a really positive way to go in terms of getting towards your net zero goal.
So Steve, we often use smarter to think about digital and the way that technology is going to change the way we live and work and play. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that today, but we thought we'd spend some time thinking about another way of considering smarter, thinking about the skills gap.
And we certainly do have a skills gap. Current estimates suggest that we've got about 2.5 million people involved in the construction industry, and by 2026 that probably needs to increase by about 10% to 2.8 million people to fulfil current demand. In reality, what we've got is, particularly post-COVID, a number of people leaving their careers perhaps earlier than they might have intended to, and graduate and apprentice recruitment is bringing in about 1%. So the likelihood is that we'll have a significant skills gap, an increasing skills gap over the next period of time. So a focus on looking at how we create those pathways for apprentices to come into the industry is absolutely critical for us. And I know you've been involved, and we've been involved in co-creating one of those in the past.
Yeah, we had the chance to work with a local authority partner and with the college and with private sector as well to think about a way to create an apprentice programme that was a bit different to what those organisations may have been running themselves, something where the apprentices had the chance to rotate around and try a few roles before they decided what was right for them, and that was particularly being targeted at local residents who might otherwise not have thought about careers in those professions. We're doing some work setting up that scheme and got to a point where a job ad had gone out and we knew that there were applicants hopefully applying. So Brendan, thank you for coming along today. Would you tell us a little bit about what that was like for you, what the apprenticeship looked like?
I took an apprenticeship because I wanted to start working and I wanted to start earning money, and I wanted to get some more hands-on experience, take a more practical approach. So the nature of the apprenticeship, where you go around and you're on placements with different companies, it enables you to create a really good knowledge base that's far more broad than you would have gained had you taken a more traditional route. I actually enjoyed the placement so much I found it hard to pick one. I took a job with the City Council for a while, and I worked in project management before I went into architecture. When I was at the council, I was working on the West Garton regeneration scheme, which is, my grandparents lived in West Garton during the war, and my family live there now. Yeah. So that was really valuable for me to work on that project. And luckily, from my apprenticeship, I knew an architect, and I asked them for a job, and they gave me one. Since then, I've set up on my own. So I work partly for myself and partly for another architect on a temporary basis.
And you were talking to us a bit before about next steps and some of the things that you might do in the future. And we're going to talk a bit later on today about greener and the climate crisis and what our industry needs to do to be ready to respond to that. That's something you're going to help us solve as well.
My dissertation was on government response to retrofitting domestic housing. And that's an area that I'm really interested in. And in the future, I'd like to be part of in terms of getting to the stage where we have a far greener housing stock. Because at the minute we have 28 million homes, the majority of which need to be made more sustainable.
Always exciting, Steve. I know both of us always enjoy thinking about ways that we can get young people into our industry. And that's something that I think we're getting better at talking about. There are more people looking at that and thinking about it, not doing enough clearly from the stats that you gave, but it's an area we think about. There's even some thinking going on about how we can reskill people, help people enter the industry who might have done something different. But something that I don't often hear people talking about is actually the massive value in those people that we were talking about and describing who are likely to leave over the next 5 or 10 years. It'd be good just to think a bit about some of the things we can be doing to not lose the skills and the experience that part of our industry has.
I agree. I definitely think that as well as putting energy into apprentice programs and graduate programs and internal training programs to reskill, we have to think more carefully about how people can contribute most effectively as they come towards the end of their careers, and maybe even beyond the date that their pension planning suggests that they need to stop working. Our current thinking is that there are probably 4 areas to focus on in this. The first is to develop an end of career program to really focus on people playing to their own skills, those that they've learned they're really good at throughout their career. Secondly, we think we need to put a lot more energy into reverse mentoring. It's a program that we do within RLB, and it's absolutely fantastic. It makes connections throughout the organisation that didn't exist before. The third thing for me would be to really seek out the wealth of experience in leadership and governance that we've got within senior members of our team, and start to apply that not only into our own organisations but into other organisations as well. And that's where the fourth element comes for me, which is where people can start giving back towards the end of their career. We could support them in non-exec roles in the third sector or public sector potentially.
Another levelling up related challenge we've heard articulated this year by many is the process for distribution of levelling up related funding. Both the sheer amount of time and effort needed and the way it seems to encourage competition between areas rather than embed collaboration. Today it feels we have an opportunity to instead think about the many ways we can work together and learn from each other. This winter is likely to involve navigating ongoing uncertainty, and we know we may have tough market conditions ahead. But focusing on what we can achieve and working together to explore long-term sustainable solutions will hopefully help us to continue to ensure that what we do deliver has maximum impact. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us, for your thoughts there. We are going to take another break right now and look forward to more thought-provoking conversations to come throughout the rest of the day. It's a perfect opportunity now, though, to discover our PSE365 platform featuring our digital marketplace and the speed networking function. So good luck with that. I'll see you back here in 10 minutes for our next session at 11:35.